In this episode of Cassette Culture, we follow the story of two people who grew up in the same UK town where they started long-running and significant projects in the post-punk era of the 80s. Those projects are Third Mind, Fourth Dimension and Grim Humour. This is Cassette Culture. Herne Bay, on the north coast of Kent, southeast England. The cathedral city of Canterbury is 8 miles inland, and the nearest coastal town to the west is Whitstable. In the early 1980s, the local youth hang out in record store Gower and Jones on the weekend. Among these are Gary Levermore and a 15-year-old Richo Johnson.
A group of us would converge in this shop on a Saturday afternoon, hang out, and there was a real assortment of different people amongst this group, and there was no guarantee who might be there in this shop either. It was just a genuine assortment of arty types, punks, weirdos, misfits, call them what you like. There would be a healthy stock of fanzines in the shop as well. There was also Tone Deaf, Gary Levermore's fanzine stocks, as well as other fanzines like Vague and whatever, and Kick and various other punk fanzines from around the country. But Tone Deaf was stocked there as well. And I remember buying that and being deeply intrigued by, that was my introduction to fanzines really, through the shop.
Visiting the likes of the Rough Trade shop in Ladbroke Grove, you'd see all kinds of fanzines there. You'd be going to gigs, picking up fanzines and just thinking, oh, fancy a bit of this myself. We were writing to lots of other fanzine editors, and that was quite inspirational too. And there was that thing of, well, they're doing it, why can't we? So we started a fanzine, so hence Tone Deaf. While putting together the third issue of the fanzine, we had this idea of just making a compilation cassette of some of the bands that were featured in the fanzine. So there's no great master plan or anything like that. It literally was, let's just put this cassette together. And it very quickly grew into something a bit more ambitious. The first issue of the fanzine, which of course was issue 2, I remember there was a big retrospective on Throbbing Gristle, who'd already been split up for a year at that point, but it still seemed very relevant. That was when I first made contact with people like Martin Bowes, Edward Carspell of the Literary Pink Dots. Nurse with Wound were featured in the issue 2 as well. I'm in touch with one of his Nurse with Wound bandmates very regularly. In fact, that's Colin Potter, who used to duplicate a lot of my cassettes back in 1982, 83.
Because I'd been buying a number of fanzines from this shop in Herne Bay, and I was probably going up to London around the same time and starting to go to places like Rough Trade and places like that. So I was starting to immerse myself in fanzines and that culture. But Tone Deaf, I would say, is one of the principal inspirations for me starting Grim Humour. But over the course of the next 2 or 3 editions of Grim Humour, we kind of branched out. We included things like Crass, there was Killing Joke, portion control, all kinds of other, more electronic stuff.
We had so few printed that the rough trade shop probably took a third of them. Of course, we sent copies of the fanzine to a few writers at the weekly papers, and I think one or two of them gave us a mention.
Okay.
I'd been corresponding with a guy who edited the fanzine NMX.
Oh, yeah.
And he actually printed the fanzines for us.
Oh, wow.
They must have been printing lots of other fanzines at the time, and it was a business for the chap who ran it. I mean, I can't remember which other fanzines he was printing, but I'm sure it wasn't just ours.
The first edition of Grim Humour was printed at a lithographic printing place in Herne Bay. And, it was all old school, cut and paste on paper. So they would have to scan this. And myself and three friends, Andy Jones, Rob Hale and Jim Crosland, who's now a breakbeat DJ and quite a successful one at that. All four of us produced this fanzine and assembled it physically. And I took the raw copy to the printing house and negotiated with them and printed 500. Looking back, I think that was quite ambitious, but we sold them.
What kind of distribution network did you have to just drop those into?
Firstly, I would have used a local shop, Gales and Jones, the record shop in Herne Bay. Also record shops in Canterbury would stock the fanzine. And I would literally just go up to London to Rough Trade and probably a couple of other shops with carrier bags full of the fanzines, and ask if they would stock them. And they would say, they would always say, yes, of course, and we would just do a sale or return agreement. And 2 or 3 weeks later or a month later, I'd be back to the shop. How the sales go? Oh, we've got some money for you. They all went, So they would go really quickly.
The early issues of Grim Humour, there were quite a few of the interviews that were made for Tone Death.
Ah, all right.
Because we never got around to the 4th issue. We just gave them to Richo. There were 1 or 2 others that got printed in Zigzag. I remember there was one with Mark Almond, which became a front cover of Zigzag. That was done for Tone Death originally.
That's where Gary Levermore comes in again, because he'd started Third Mind Records. He was my go-to person for advice about how to produce a Flexi-disc. Anyway, Grim Humour 3, 1984, Gary Levermore had already founded Fourth Dimension Records as a subsidiary to Third Mind. I had this discussion with him about this idea of doing a Flexi-disc. What do I do? How do I do it? And then he actually proposed dealing with everything for me. He said, I'll do the Flexi-disc. All you got to do is give me some money and I'll take care of everything. And that was 1984. Gary had already done one release on Fourth Dimension Records by a group called Persian Flowers. He then said, let's make the Flexi-disc a Fourth Dimension release. And when we were talking about where to go next with Fourth Dimension, he actually said, I'm abandoning Fourth Dimension. this label done. So I took it over. It took another few years for me to really act on that impulse, but I did.
Now focused on Third Mind as the label he was putting his energy into, then called Third Mind Tapes, Gary made use of his network of contacts from the Tone Death fanzine to assemble music for the new label. Even though it only ran for 3 issues, his interviews and articles for Tone Death had already included SPK, Chris and Cozy, Heaven 17, Lustmord, Legendary Pink Dots and Attrition. And the collection of music that he was about to release would ultimately appear as a 5-volume compilation series to be known as Rising from the Red Sand. What strikes me about that whole sort of 5-year period is just the phenomenally good sort of curating you were doing. It sounds like you were doing it in the fanzine already and building up those contacts. So when you started off Third Mind, you just had all these really significant artists ready to do releases. And I don't know if this is a question you can answer, but how did you sort of tap into that level of artists?
It was probably more a case of I knew what I liked. Bearing in mind the first cassette compilation, as I said, there were artists in the fanzine that were sending cassettes of tracks that they were quite happy to have on the compilation. So there were maybe 6 or 7 artists in the fanzine who went on to the first volume of Rising from the Red Sand. But then 2 or 3 of those artists then sent me other tracks. How about putting a track by these guys on your compilation? So a very obvious example there. I got to know through going to shows in the early 80s. Obviously, I got to know a lot of other bands. A very obvious example, I was given a track by the band 5 or 6 who were on Cherry Red. Used to bump into a couple of the guys in the band very regularly. And then one of them sent me a cassette with 2 other acts on it. One was a band I'd heard of called Test Department, and a band I hadn't heard of called Fantan. And they both ended up being on the first Rising from the Red Sand volumes 1 and 2. Obviously, Test Department went on to make a lot of records and become reasonably famous. Fantan didn't.
You put that compilation together, pooling all of the contacts that you'd made in the lead up and after the fanzine. And how was it received at the time you released it?
I got a loan from my uncle, £500, and we had 250 copies pressed up. And we thought, okay, well, we'll give a couple of copies to each band, which would leave about 200 to sell. I think we did the usual thing. We sent a copy to John Peel, and we sent a copy to Dave Henderson at Sounds, who seemed to be one of the only sympathetic voices at the weekly papers.
Rising from the Red Sand released in February 1983 as a 2-volume set, with each cassette packaged separately in distinctive coloured wallets. The track list included music by Nurse with Wound, Attrition, Portion Control, Chris and Cozy, Test Department and others. The collection of this new wave of innovative electronic music captured the attention of music press and audiences alike, making the set one of the most important underground releases of the decade. Music papers in the UK would sell in excess of 100,000 copies each week. Picking up the cassette review column in the Sounds music paper was journalist Dave Henderson.
I've been picking up cassettes from lots of different places over the years, and eventually I wound up on Sounds, and a package came to the office which was Rising from the Red Sand. And it was like a bit like Christmas Day, because here were a load of groups who I vaguely heard about, some who I knew, and some who I'd got vinyl by on the Intake label. I think Legendary Pink Dots and Portion Control, etc. And then bands who were playing live like Test Department. So picking up on these things was quite exciting. I think Attrition were a bit of a revelation, and I knew Nurse with Wound because Steve lived around the corner from me in Archway, and we used to go for a pint in a very scary pub up there. But having everything collected in one place was very useful for me, because as soon as I started contacting all these people, they introduced me to lots more, and the ball started rolling.
I met Gary in 1983. We sent him a demo actually first, and then he put out the Attrition Onslaught cassette on Third Mind tapes, and then the Red Sands, and we had 3 songs on 5 volumes, and they did really well, and Dave Henderson picked up on them. And he ran a lot of articles in his Wild Planet column in Sounds in like 83 mostly. I don't know if it went over to 84, but he interviewed us, reviewed us over 83, 84, and it really did. It made a big difference to not only the scene generally, but it really helped start us off. Very good days.
Oh, I also sent a copy to Rough Trade, and I got a call at work, and it was an interesting conversation about what could we sell copies to Rough Trade for. When I said how many copies were available, he said, you might need a few more. And a week or so later, I was told by Dave Henderson that he was reviewing in the issue that was coming out that Thursday, which was all the weeklies were available in newsagents. I walked into the one in my local high street and opened up Sounds, and there was a 5-star review of the cassette. Within days, I was starting to get orders. I was spending my lunch hours posting these cassette packages at the post office and spending quite a lot of my evenings packaging them up. Quite soon after, released cassettes by Attrition, Portion Control, the Legendary Pink Dots. There was a more noisy electronic compilation as well. There was a compilation of electronic artists that were more in the Tangerine Dream cosmic field, people like Ian Boddy.
Things moved fast for Third Mind. With the label now established and releasing its first vinyl LPs from Konstruktivists and soon to be followed by Nurse with Wound, Gary was looking for his next steps to grow the label further.
And by the early summer, I thought I may as well put together another compilation of Rising from the Red Sand, and that's how volumes 3, 4, 5 came together, and they came together very, very quickly. I mean, I released the first Third Mind vinyl LP in September 83. That was an album by Konstruktivists. Steve Stapleton of Nursery Wound gave me an album to put out, literally gave me the record. And that helped to finance the first few proper LP releases on Third Mind.
Back to Grim Humour. While Gary focused on Third Mind Records, Richo Johnson was absorbed in writing and eventually publishing 18 issues of the now successful Grim Humour fanzine, interviewing Killing Joke, Virgin Prunes, Death in June, Portion Control, Nick Cave, Sonic Youth, Coil, and many others. But he soon turned his attention to Fourth Dimension.
I had this wild ambition. I didn't even really think about it. And because it was such a success, and because of that, it got reviews. There were lots of magazines like Zigzag magazine, and it got reviewed in other fanzines as well. So I started tapping into that network immediately.
Yeah.
And writing to various people. And I love, getting involved with all of that. That's where, over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, Alan Ryder entered my radar, because he was one of those people that was very hands-on with all of that as well.
Yeah.
So all of these different people came in, and a lot of these people really helped each other. People would sometimes write and say, I can take 10 copies of your next fanzine and sell them in a local shop. And, okay, I'll do the same. And, of course, I had this friend in Herne Bay who would say, yeah, I'll sell the fanzines for you, So already, there, by default or design, there was this ready-made network of people just wanting to be involved. I think it just comes from that same impetus of just wanting to somehow be involved in something. Every new contact brings with it another fanzine or a cassette or something, and you're writing to all these different addresses. So I was one of those people writing to those, scouring the fanzines for addresses. Oh, well, that one looks interesting. I'll write to them. I was tapped into all of this, and it was just so exciting and so interesting.
As you went on and developed the label further, did you sort of have like some sort of parameters musically of what you were looking for?
My tastes in music are very broad. And so maybe there are certain parameters, because it's not solely electronic music or noise, so-called noise music, or abstract music or post-punk inspired music. It's all of those and a little bit more, I would say.
Yeah, do you think there's like a sort of inner thread that goes through all of those things that's, at the heart of it?
This is something I've thought long and hard over during recent years. And I think, for me, it's a question of sensibilities. Firstly, I'm sure most of the people I work with don't believe me, but I have to like them as well. I kind of have to like the people that I'm working with, or I have to have a certain respect for them. Gary Mundy from Ramley, I do all of his solo work there as Kleishfar. I like that connection that goes beyond the music as well. So so in a way, again, I'm thinking loud here because it kind of relates to an earlier point you made. Maybe I'm still working with people I can easily network with and meet up with.
One of the things that struck me was there was, I think there was Thurston Moore, was it? And a drummer, like an EP.
Yeah, Tom Surgal. I did a series of 10-inch releases in the 90s. As I said, there were some cassettes in between. There were mostly compilations, and even Sonic Youth are on one of the cassettes, with a live track, and groups like Portion Control and whatever. I was one of the first people to interview Sonic Youth when they came over in 1985. I know they'd been to England once before that. They played in London in 1983, I think. But when they started getting all this attention with Bad Moon Rising in 1985, I was one of the people that first interviewed them. And I formed quite a good relationship with them. Last First Records produced a fanzine called Sonic Life, and I was one of the contributors to Sonic Life. So Thurston knew of me, at least, and we'd met a few times. And he agreed. He agreed immediately to doing a release. I've tried badgering him for another release since, but it hasn't happened yet. So...
I was sent a cassette by three guys that were writing individually to me, ordering Rising from the Red Sand and various other tapes. And they got a band together and they sent me a cassette and said, "Would you like to put this out?" And they were called Skinny Puppy. To my eternal regret, I turned them down, which was fine for them because obviously they soon got to deal with a new label in Vancouver called Network.
Yeah, and you turned them down on the basis of what?
What they did was great. It really reminded me of Portion Control and, of course, Cabaret Voltaire. And I'd already released something by Portion Control. It's weird because, hence no background in running a business. Right. And then somehow got through that year and then things just started happening. I got sent a couple of cassettes by one of the guys in Vancouver. Said, "Oh, I'm not in Skinny Puppy anymore. I've started a new project. I'm calling it Frontline Assembly. Would you like to put this out?" And we talked about the running orders, changed them around a little bit. In fact, I think initially he sent me one big cassette and I said, "There's too much for an album. Let's do an album and a mini album. Oh, and this particular track sounds great. Why don't we make it a lead track on the mini album as well?" And that's how those came together. Somebody I knew from the mid-'80s scene in Canterbury, he happened to be working for Roadrunner, and he contacted me and said, "Oh, I think my boss would be really interested in talking to you." And that's how 50% of Third Mind ended up being sold to Roadrunner.
Oh wow! So still just through the sort of the Whitstable Mafia.
They paid off my debt, and I got a salary for the first time. I mean, it wasn't much. It meant I could survive. But I think it's true to say I definitely lost something from going into that partnership. I mean, I gained quite a bit, but ultimately it wasn't quite the same. Roadrunner offered me some money just to leave and then take it over. You know, within 3 years, you know, the whole thing had ended. To be honest with you, I think because definitely the magic had gone. That's very true. You know, it taken me right through my 20s, so I was 30 when I got out. But I just felt like I really needed a bit of a reset and just do something different. A lot of the artists who came out of it are still very active. You know, Legendary Pink Dots, Attrition, Nurse with Wound. You know, other people went into slightly different areas. You know, I think of somebody like Graham Revell, you know, SPK, you know, suddenly becomes a major soundtrack composer. To an extent, maybe it got driven back underground for a long time, but then got rediscovered again.
In this episode of Cassette Culture, you heard the voices of Richo Johnson, Gary Levermore, Dave Henderson, and Martin Bowes. The music you heard was Mansonik No. 1 by Konstruktivists from the album Psychogenetica, Song of the Flame by Tone Death from Rising from the Red Sand, Love Is by Legendary Pink Dots from the album Basilisk, Page After Page by I'm Dead from the Grim Humour Flexi-disc on Fourth Dimension Records, Gdansk by Test Department from Rising from the Red Sand, Onslaught by Attrition from the Onslaught album on Third Mind, At Set Points by Ian Boddy from the Visions compilation on Third Mind, Strange Play of the Mouth by Nurse with Wound from Rising from the Red Sand, Grow Dark in the Sun by Mummies and Madmen on Winter Hill Recordings, Not Me by Thurston Moore and Tom Surgal from the 10-inch EP on Fourth Dimension, Filmosonic by Konstruktivists from Psychogenetica, and Bite My Head by Portion Control from Rising from the Red Sand.
What?